Hello, everyone. Class and professor Sean Tyndall. Doing my book report. Um, Before we get started, just want to say enjoyed working with everybody in the class. Um, definitely got some good learning experience out of this class, and some leadership skills and understanding of leadership that I definitely did not understand at that level before. So thank you, both classmates and professor, for that. Um, the book I chose to review, and actually, before we get into that, just one thing: I am recording this from my iMac, which happens to be in my bedroom, and I know everybody's going to be not concentrating on me and looking at that picture in the background. That is of me barefoot water skiing. That's what we do up in Michigan. So if you're ever in Grand Rapids, I'll take you out. It is a fun sport, but it does hurt when you fall. So when you're going 34 and you hit the water, it does not feel good. So you try not to fall. Anyways, to the getting to the book report. The book I chose to review was Drive by Daniel Pink. And I actually read this book about 4 years ago. Picked it up in the airport when I was taking a trip, and read it then, and it definitely did apply in some areas that I understood at that time, but I was in college, in undergrad. So actually rereading it this time through again gave me some good perspectives, and some more in-depth understanding of it. I think the reason for that was because um, at that point I was actually able to um, apply it to my actual job. So I think that was beneficial to have some on-the-job experience for the past 4 or 5 years, 4 years, I guess, so that I could apply it to some of the three different jobs that I've had since then. So it gave me some new perspectives on the book and sort of brought it to life more than it had before. So, anyways, just want to give you a quick rundown of what we're gonna do on this. First, we're gonna basically review the book elements, background behind the book, and then go into detail on those elements and how Daniel Pink outlines those in the book. And then we're gonna do an sort of analysis of the material and how it sort of applies to what we've learned in class and some of the concepts learned in class, and then just sort of do a conclusion and a practical application to my current job. So, without further ado, the book Drive by Daniel Pink. Um, Basically, this book, the main argument of this book is really, first of all, Daniel Pink really does a good job taking it from a more creative perspective. So he writes his book to really business leaders, students, anybody that's in any nature of business or organization. It doesn't have to be, could be nonprofit, or could be government work, any type of structured organization, and sort of brings to light a lot of new concepts regarding how people are managed and actually where the motivation comes for employees. Ultimately, is where the employee motivation comes from. So he takes the interesting thing about this book is he really takes what the traditional thought of motivation has been, and he sort of flips it on its head. Um, so getting into that sort of the outline of how he does that, really, he lays out the first portion of the book, and it's really laying out exactly the historical progression of motivation. So he starts with motivation 1.0, he calls 1.0, which is before the industrial age, which is really more needs based, food, water, shelter, basic needs for motivation, and that's how motivation is derived for an individual. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you learn that in maybe marketing class, that would be a good concept to think of. The pyramid of the needs. The first few have to be met before you can reach the self-actualization at the top of the hierarchy. Um, so that's motivation 1.0. Motivation 2.0 is moving forward into what you call the industrialized era, so like the anywhere from the 20s to the 2000s where we are now, um, which is essentially saying motivation is really a sort of a hierarchical, top down, more organization carrots and sticks type premise. So essentially motivation, and also a big part of the 2.0 would be motivation by monetary figures, so money. Whether that's in sales or other areas, basically his premise is that motivation 2.0, which is, like I said, what we're seeing up until currently, but now that's starting to phase out with 3.0, which I'll talk about in a second. Motivation 2.0 is really that determining those needs and the motivation that comes from it based on carrots and sticks. So having leaders that are organized and are really driving the progress, and setting sales, potentially if it's sales goals or other goals, and having employees reach and achieve those and get compensated. So I guess if you could think of motivation 2.0 in one word, it would essentially be maximize profits. And with motivation 1.0, you could say it would be more survival. And then what I'm going to talk about more in a second, motivation 3.0 would be purpose maximization, maximizing more of a purpose, a more global perspective. So moving on into the current and future, which is really the outline of this whole book, Daniel Pink is essentially talking about how motivation is changing. So we're sort of shifting from this 2.0, which we're in now, and we're already started and have begun, and we are definitely in and growing in motivation 3.0, which is really outlined by what he calls like an intrinsic motivation. So basically, his whole premise is that people aren't really motivated by money. They're not really motivated by the carrots and sticks, like telling people to do things all the time and watching, say, a manager, sits in their corner office and they're watching their little peons work. He's essentially saying that this type of top-down leadership and top-down organization is going away. And we've sort of seen that from some of the newer, I guess like more new age employment firms. We've seen that. We're starting to see that like with Google, a lot of the West Coast firms, different firms around the country. Actually, Ford just announced this week that they're going to be changing all their office furniture to accommodate more group collaboration and thinking spaces, creativity. And I think that's all really part of this motivation 3.0 that Pink is talking about, which essentially explains that creativity and more bottom up, I guess, grassroots type motivation is really what employees need to be concentrated on versus managers telling them that you need to do this and this and check the box in order to get stuff done. So that's really the premise of it. The motivation 1.0, the needs to rise and fall of motivation 2.0, which we're in now, and we're going into motivation 3.0. And then ultimately the motivation 3.0 and where we'll go from there. A few things to note on the book of how Daniel Pink outlines the information here. First, the main argument, I guess, would be to say that he puts in place is more collaborative, more creative spaces need to be built for employees. With motivation 2.0 industrialization, you have employees that are making widgets or doing more piecemeal type work, and now the work is moving to more creative work, more thought work, more collaboration work that doesn't need a top-down approach like you would see in an assembly line. So that's really one of his major points there. That brings me into my two thoughts about where this would apply to our class. There's definitely a lot of areas where it does fit in very well with the class material we've learned already. One of those would be the manager versus the leader, the difference between those. We had a whole forum discussion, if you remember, back in I think it was forum 3 or 4, regarding the manager versus the leader and what that means, how the manager and the leader differ. Um, First, structured versus unstructured. For the manager and the leader, I would say this whole motivation piece and what Pink is bringing into play really would say I would picture motivation 2.0 at more of a structured vantage point and more of a manager type role. So we talked about the manager versus the leader, if there's a difference there. A lot of people brought out a lot of good points on that, but I would liken the manager as motivation 2.0 being more of the orderly, constructive, but major points and not allowing for much creativity. More of an assembly line type style, although it doesn't have to be an assembly line. It can be an insurance office like my office. And then number 2, the leader, which is a leader really, in my mind, with how it applies to Daniel Pink's work, is that it's really going to bring the creativity out and do more group collaboration sessions, and understand that employees are going to actually motivate themselves. Because if you hire employees, that one of Pink's major points is that if leaders, this is huge for leaders, because if they hire employees that are going to be self-motivated, then they're not going to have to motivate them. They're not going to have to sit there and count how many widgets they made and monitor, track them, and see what time they logged in to work in the morning. And that's where Pink sort of brings up a lot of interesting points about, whether or not, and leading in this leadership, whether or not people are motivated by money, and his argument that would be that they won't, or they're not, because people are really motivated more with doing good, but enjoying, to an extent what they do. A few things that he notes on that is Wikipedia. He likens this to Microsoft Encarta, which was a great encyclopedia that Microsoft had, was a paid version, and he said never in a million years would anybody think that here you run into Wikipedia, which is completely, nobody's paid to do it, and it's now massive with users all over the world, and it's completely a nonprofit and self-funded by people that are doing it for free supply of information and collaboration. So if you think of the Wikipedia concept, there's also a few other ones like Microsoft Firefox, or sorry, not Microsoft Firefox, but Firefox, versus like Microsoft Internet Explorer, which is paid. There's a lot of what's called open source projects that really tip the standard ideas of motivation on its head. Because if you're looking at motivation from a top-down perspective and a pay per work perspective, then that wouldn't make sense that those type of projects would go well and be some of the largest projects, open source projects that have ever been created. So that is one takeaway from the class. Number 2 takeaway is Owen and Dietz, the myths of change. This is a little more straightforward, but basically outlining how they mentioned change starts at the top, and really go through how that would be a myth that perfectly aligns with this discussion of motivation. Change is really going to be built from the ground up, which is why you're seeing this whole Motivation 3.0, more grassroots things coming into play with work areas and workspaces and work ideas. And then efficiency comes from control, which is completely opposite of Motivation 3.0. Motivation 2.0 is all about control. 3.0 is all about more creativity, more hands-off, more open source, and letting employees sort of actually do what they want and create their own path within rough guidelines. So an example that Daniel Pink uses in the book is discussing the fact that Google and some different companies, not just Google, but other companies, are using what they call, it's more like free time, where 20 to 30% is just working on their own projects that aren't even related to work. And this is actually bringing a lot of great ideas to the field that were never thought of before, simply because people have been enlightened with the fact that they're using the creative skills to sort of think of these new ideas. So that's really the two major applications to class. Although there's definitely a lot more. Those are just two of the main ones that I did pick out. But really, the whole book went really well and acted as a good. As I was reading this throughout the class, it really meshed really well with what we were learning, and went along with a lot of the concepts we had learned. So to sort of wrap up, bottom line, motivation. This book, I think it's a fantastic book. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody. It really does sort of spin conventional thinking on your head. For my workplace, just as an example, I would consider my workplace a very traditional workplace. We have high cubes. We have our higher salary grades that are in their nice offices. We are our managers, which are in their cubes, which oversee the rest of the cubes. And insurance is, of course, not a very changing industry. It's one of the last to change. It tends to be a little old school, I guess. But nonetheless, I think the point there is that I am sort of seeing. I mean, this has come up a lot. I mean, managers and in meetings of what does motivate, especially our generation, or my generation, the younger millennial generation, they like to say. And I think there's a lot of good thoughts, and it doesn't have to necessarily be millennials. It can be any generation, but you're seeing this sort of across the board where people are sort of doing more creative projects and sort of off the cuff ideas and concepts, and people are telecommuting more. So there's a lot of changes within the workplace that are sort of suggesting this Motivation 3.0 taking hold. Our president just the other day was talking about more flexible work styles because if people are responsible and are going to get their job done, there's really a lot of other alternatives than sitting in the cubicle all day. So I think there are changes being made towards this, and I think it is slowly going in other industries, but it is going to take some time. But overall, I would recommend the book to anybody. And if you have any other questions on it, just post, and I'll definitely respond. And I look forward to watching your guys' other presentations. So thank you very much.